I wiped the sweat from my brow with the back of my sleeve, the coarse fabric already soaked through from the morning's work. Another day, another shipment. My shoulders burned as I levered a heavy wooden crate onto the stack, the ropes biting into my palms. Life at Stone Harbor's docks was simple and brutal. I spent my days hauling cargo, checking barrels, securing ropes thick as my arm, marking cargo with chalk, and fixing pulleys when they jammed under the strain. No family waited for me at the end of the day. No wife, no children, no noble name to shield me from the salt and the sweat. People in the port barely knew I existed. If they needed something moved, they just shouted for the fellow from Pier 9. That morning started like any other. I was crouched beside a stack of crates labeled agricultural tools. The weight made me mutter under my breath. If these are hoes and shovels, they must be planning to dig through a mountain. The harbor was its usual chaos, ropes creaking against wooden pilings, sailors cursing each other in half a dozen languages, seagulls screaming overhead, and the constant groan of the great wooden cranes swinging cargo through the air. I figured it would be just another ordinary shift. Then the harbor bell rang out, 3 long, deep peals that echoed across the water. Not the fire bell, not the storm warning. This was the royal delegation bell. Every dock worker froze. The harbor master, dressed in his formal coat, came running as if stung by wasps. I sighed. Whenever nobility showed up, it meant more paperwork, more standing at attention, and more trouble for people like me. From beyond the bay, a large ship glided into view. It wasn't a merchant vessel. Its hull was black and sleek, the prow carved into the snarling head of a wolf. Deep green sails billowed, and the Royal Orc banner snapped proudly from the main mast. As it docked, Orc guards disembarked. First tall, disciplined warriors in a dark armor, long axes strapped to their backs. They moved with silent precision. Then she appeared at the top of the gangplank. She was tall and commanding, her black hair braided with silver threads, a white fur cloak draped over her shoulders. Even from a distance, her presence commanded silence. This was the Queen of the North, the woman who had united the Orc tribes after a bloody rebellion. I had only heard her name in tavern stories. They said she was a warrior, a politician, a survivor of the Blackstone prison, the one who made chieftains kneel. The entire harbor fell deathly quiet as she descended the gangplank. The harbor master bowed deeply. Diplomats stood in neat rows ready to greet her, but the Queen didn't look at them. Her sharp eyes scanned the crowd of dock workers. Then, without hesitation, she began walking not toward the welcoming committee, not toward the waiting carriages, but straight toward me. I glanced behind me. No one. I looked left and right, just crates and a few gaping dock hands. She kept coming. She stopped directly in front of me. For a long moment, she studied my face. Then, in a voice that carried across the entire dock loud enough for every official guard and worker to hear, she declared, "I know this man." The harbor seemed to freeze in stunned silence. The harbor master's face went pale. The Orc guards gripped their axes tighter, staring at me as if I might be a threat. I pointed at my own chest, confused. "Me," she nodded once. Then she removed her ceremonial hood. I saw it then, a thin, familiar scar near her temple. Memories slammed into me like a breaking wave. The dark stone walls, the cold, the hunger. The girl with the short-cropped hair and soot-stained face who had shared the shadows with me in the Karzug mines. I whispered, barely able to believe it, "You're the girl from the Karzug stone mines." A small smile touched her lips. It wasn't the smile of a queen. It was the smile of someone who had once sat beside me in the darkness, splitting a single piece of stale bread so we could both survive one more freezing night. She knew me. And in that moment, standing there with calloused hands and salt-stained clothes, I knew her too. The powerful Queen Vera Blacktusk had once been the nameless prisoner I had helped years ago. My name is Garen Vale, and everything I thought I understood about my ordinary life had just shattered on the docks of Stone Harbor. I stood there in the middle of the dock, my hook still gripped tightly in my calloused hand, my shirt stained with salt and sweat. Before me stood the Queen of the North, Vera Blacktusk, her presence making the entire harbor feel small. The disparity was almost comical. I was just a dock hand, 33 years old, covered in grime from hauling crates all morning, while she was the woman who had united the Orc tribes after rivers of blood. Yet here she was, smiling at me, like we were old friends from a nightmare we both survived. If I had known you would become queen, I said, my voice rough from years of shouting over crashing waves, I would have been a lot more polite back then. Vera threw her head back and laughed, a genuine sound that cut through the stunned silence of the harbor. Her orc guards shifted uncomfortably, their hands tightening on the hilts of their axes. They weren't used to seeing their queen laugh with a human dockworker. The harbor master looked like he might faint. Diplomats whispered frantically behind their hands. Before the entire crowd of officials and workers, Vera began to speak. Her voice carried clearly across the pier. 6 months, she said. For 6 months, you shared your food with me in Karzug. I shrugged, trying to keep my tone light even as memories flooded back. I shared with a lot of people. Not everyone shows up years later on a royal ship. But inside the images were sharp and unforgiving. The black stone walls of Karzug prison mine, the guards who beat prisoners for sport, the endless lines of chained humans, orcs, and elves forced to dig silver from the earth until their hands bled. I had been thrown in there for refusing to pay the king's brutal tax collectors back in my village. They called it rebellion. I called it not wanting to watch my neighbors starve. Vera had been there under a false name, Mara. Short-cropped hair face smeared with soot eyes that watched everything but revealed nothing. I had thought she was just another stubborn orc girl trying to survive. I never suspected she was a lost princess. I'd given her half my daily ration of dry barley bread more times than I could count. I had slipped her a broken knife blade I found in the refuse pile. I had started fake arguments with the guards about the rotten soup they served, just to draw their attention away from her when she was too weak to stand. Once I even passed her a piece of bent wire so she could pick the lock on the tool shed door when no one was looking. To me, those were small things, acts of desperation between people who had nothing left. To her, they had been the sparks that lit a rebellion. Now she stood before the entire harbor and told them the truth. I was not an ordinary prisoner, she declared, her voice steady and loud. I was a princess whose throne had been stolen. A faction of orc nobles murdered my father, seized the crown, and hid me away in Karzug so no one would ever know the true heir still lived. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The harbor master's face went from pale to gray. Even the orc guards looked shocked, though they tried to hide it. Vera continued without pause. She described how the rebellion inside the mine had begun because of those small kindnesses, because one human dockworker had refused to let a fellow prisoner starve. After the uprising, she escaped. She gathered loyal tribes, reclaimed her throne through fire and blood, and became the queen who now stood before us, Atuahas. I let out a long breath. So I once handed a knife to a future queen. She looked at me, her yellow eyes soft in a way I had never seen on a ruler. No, you handed a knife to a starving prisoner. That is why I remember you, Garen Vale. The officials were now staring at me like I was some priceless artifact that had washed up on the dock. The harbor master hurried forward, bowing repeatedly. My lord, sir, perhaps you should accompany Her Majesty to the receiving hall. This is hardly the place I cut him off. I still have crates to check. Vera's gaze never left my face. You still avoid the spotlight the same way you did back then. Big eyes usually bring big trouble, I muttered. She didn't deny it. Trouble arrived faster than either of us expected. One of her guards ran up, breathing hard. 3 unmarked warships just appeared beyond the fog bank, Your Majesty. They're moving fast. Vera turned toward the bay. I followed her gaze and saw 3 dark shapes slicing through the mist. They weren't merchant vessels. Merchants didn't sail in tight attack formation. They're not here to pay respects, I said quietly. Vera glanced at me, a flicker of the old Mara in her eyes. You still rid danger as quickly as you used to. She leaned close enough that only I could hear. Those ships belong to the remnants of the faction that built Karzug. They want me dead, and now that I have publicly recognized you, they will want you erased too. You know the truth about the mine. You know what they did there. Her guards immediately moved to escort me aboard the royal ship. I tried to protest. I still have a shift to finish. Vera looked at me the way she used to when I argued with the guards over that terrible soup. Garen, if you stay on this dock, they will kill you before you can complain about the paperwork. I sighed, staring at the familiar ropes and crates that had been my entire world for years. I hate diplomatic days. Then I followed her up the gangplank onto the Royal Orc ship, leaving the life I knew behind on the salt-stained boards of Pier 9. The deck of the Royal Orc ship felt like stepping into another world. Polished black wood gleamed under my boots, every plank fitted so tightly that not a single drop of seawater could slip through. Carved runes ran along the masts and railings, glowing faintly with some old magic I didn't understand. Orc warriors stood at rigid attention along every walkway, axes resting against their shoulders. I walked carefully, afraid my salt-crusted boots would leave dirty prints on the thick woven rugs that covered the deck, Vera noticed. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "You once slept on the stone floor of Karzug prison," she said quietly. "Do not fear my rugs, Garen." I gave a short laugh. "Stone floors never charged you extra if you tracked mud on them." She laughed again, softer this time, and the sound eased something tight in my chest. For a moment, she wasn't the queen who had united the northern tribes. She was Mara, again the quiet girl who had once pressed her shoulder against mine for warmth in the dark. Inside the command cabin, the air was thick with tension. Maps covered a long table. Lanterns swung gently with the motion of the ship. The captain, a broad-shouldered orc with scars across his jaw, pointed at the three dark shapes cutting through the fog outside. 3 unmarked warships, he reported, moving fast. More may be hidden behind the mist. They fly no colors. I stepped closer to the table, even though I had no right to be there. I had spent 15 years watching ships come and go from Pier 9. I knew how cargo moved, how defenses worked, and how easy it was to cripple a harbor if you knew where to strike. If I were them, I said, my voice rough from years of shouting over waves, I wouldn't hit the heaviest armor first. I'd go for the anchor lines, the oil stores, and the loading gates, set the docks burning, create chaos, then slip in and strike. The orc generals frowned. One of them opened his mouth to argue, but the captain studied the map, traced a line with his thick finger, and nodded once. He's right. That is exactly how I would do it. I kept going. They know how the harbor operates. That means someone inside the port gave them the layout. Someone who knows which warehouses hold the oil barrels and which cranes control the main berths. The harbor master who had been brought aboard turned white as salt. His hands trembled at his sides. Vera unrolled a thick scroll and spread it across the table. The parchment was old edges worn, names filled column after column. These are the people who survived Karzug and are still alive, she said. Her voice was calm, but I heard the steel beneath it. Many have died in the last 2 years. Fell down a well. Killed by bandits on the road. Disappeared while traveling. I scanned the list. I recognized too many of them faces I had shared bread with, backs I had helped carry ore for. My stomach tightened. They're not just hunting you, I said. They're erasing every witness who can talk about what really happened in that mine. Vera's eyes met mine. The man behind it all is Lord Malgor Drax. He ran Karzug. After I took the throne, he vanished. Now he returns with hired ships and mercenaries. The name hit me like a crate dropped from a crane. I remembered that voice, cold board ordering guards to beat prisoners who worked too slowly. I remembered the white bone ring on his finger, the one he twisted while he watched men bleed. If Malgor is still alive, I said, he didn't come to threaten. He came to finish the job. The meeting ended quickly after that. Orders flew. Warriors moved to their posts. Vera led me out onto the forward deck where the wind whipped across the water. Salt spray stung my face. Her white cloak snapped behind her like a banner. She stopped at the rail and looked out toward the approaching ships. "Are you angry with me?" she asked. I leaned on the rail beside her. "For what?" "For becoming queen while you stayed a dockhand." I gave a short, bitter laugh. "I didn't pull you out of that mine because I wanted a reward. I did it because you were hungry and I had half a piece of bread." Vera turned to face me fully. The wind tugged strands of black hair across her scarred temple. "That is exactly why I never forgot you." Before I could answer, the first fiery arrow arced through the fog. It slammed into the oil warehouse on the outer pier. Flames exploded upward in a roar of orange and black. Shouts rose from the docks. Dock workers scattered, but because of the warning I had given, barrels of sand and water had already been positioned. Crews were already fighting the blaze. The 3 warships broke from the mist oars, churning. They came straight for the harbor, aiming to turn the chaos into slaughter. Vera's hand tightened on the rail. She looked at me, eyes hard, with the same determination I had seen in the mines years ago. "Garen," She said you once opened an escape route out of Kars Zug. Today can you open one that keeps Stone Harbor alive? I stared back at Pier 9, the place where I had thought I would grow old hauling crates and fixing ropes. Smoke was already rising. Screams carried across the water. I rolled my shoulders once, feeling the familiar ache of years of labor. If they touch my cranes, I said, they're going to regret it. Vera nodded. She reached for the heavy axe strapped to her back and settled it in her grip. The queen was gone. In her place stood the warrior who had survived the darkest prison in the north. The battle for Stone Harbor had begun. The smoke from the burning oil warehouse stung my eyes as I ran along the narrow catwalk behind the salt sheds. My boots pounded on the weathered planks I had repaired 100 times. I knew every rotten board, every hidden gap, every shortcut a dock worker used when the foreman wasn't looking. Behind me, 6 of Vera's orc guards followed in tight formation, axes ready, their heavy armor clanking softly. This way I hissed, dropping down into the old fish dock tunnel that most people had forgotten existed. The air smelled of brine and rot. We emerged behind the enemy lines right where the 3 unmarked warships had rammed against the outer pier. Their mercenaries were already pouring onto the dock torches, raised swords drawn. I pointed at the thick anchor ropes tied to the nearest crane. Cut those lines on my signal. When the crane swings, it'll smash straight into their bow. One of the orcs grinned, showing tusks. You fight like a dock rat. I am a dock rat. I gave the signal. 3 axes flashed. The ropes parted with sharp snaps. The massive crane arm, already loaded with counterweight, whipped around like a giant club. It slammed into the lead warship with a bone-jarring crunch, splintering wood and pinning the vessel against the pier. Shouts of alarm turned to panic. Chaos erupted. In the middle of the smoke and flames, Vera climbed onto the high stone steps that overlooked the entire harbor. Her white cloak was stained with soot, but she stood like a storm given form. Her voice rang out clear and powerful, carrying over the roar of fire and the clash of steel. I am Vera Blacktusk. I was once a prisoner in Kars Zug. I returned today to speak the truth. Every dockworker, sailor, and soldier on the pier froze for a heartbeat. This wasn't just a battle anymore. This was the Queen tearing open a secret that powerful men had tried to bury in blood and stone. From the deck of the largest enemy ship, a man stepped forward. Lord Malgor Drax. Older now, face harder, but I recognized the white bone ring glinting on his finger. He laughed a cold, mocking sound. A queen reminding the rabble of her prison days. You soil your own throne, Vera, she answered without hesitation. No, I am cleaning it. Malgor's eyes swept the pier and found me standing beside her, his face twisted with recognition and hatred. That mouthy human who always complained about the soup, he snarled. Kill him first. Mercenaries surged toward me. I wasn't a knight. I had no shining armor or noble sword, but I had 15 years of hauling cargo on these docks. I knew how to fight with what was here. I snatched my loading hook from my belt, whipped a loose rope around a mercenary's ankle, and yanked. He crashed down. Another I tripped with a barrel of sand I had rolled into place earlier. A third I shoved straight into the path of a swinging crane hook. The metal caught him in the chest and lifted him screaming into the air. A heavy hand slammed into my back, driving me to my knees at the edge of the pier. I tasted blood. Malgor raised a crossbow, aiming straight at my heart. An orc shield crashed into the arrow mid-flight. Vera was there in an instant, yanking me upright with one powerful hand. Her voice was raw with fury and something deeper. I did not find you again after all these years, just so you could die on a tangle of rope, I coughed, grinning despite the pain. That was tactical rope. For a split second, even in the middle of battle, she laughed the same short, surprised laugh I remembered from the mines. I didn't waste the moment. The agricultural tools crates, I shouted to the dockworkers who had started to rally. Open them! Together with a handful of brave longshoremen, we flipped the suspicious crates I had inspected that morning. Instead of hoes and shovels, they spilled out hidden armor and weapons bearing Malgor's mark. Proof of treason lay scattered across the pier for everyone to see. The crowd roared Vera's name. Fresh orc reinforcements stormed off the royal ship, crashing into Malgor's forces. The enemy warships were now trapped between burning docks and Vera's arriving fleet. Malgor tried to retreat toward his vessel, but Vera cut him off on the narrow wooden gangway between ships. Their duel was short and brutal. Axe against sword, steel rang, sparks flew. Vera moved like the warrior she had always been. She knocked his blade aside, spun, and drove her boot into his chest. Malgor dropped to his knees on the blood-slick planks. He glared up at her, breathing hard. "You are still just an escaped prisoner." Vera stood over him, axe-raised voice steady enough to carry across the entire burning harbor. "Yes, and that prisoner became queen. She did not kill him. She brought the flat of her axe down on the side of his head, knocking him unconscious, then ordered her guards to bind him in chains. He would live to confess before the council of both nations. When the last enemy soldier threw down his weapon, the smoke began to thin. Pier 9 was scorched and battered, but it still stood. Dock workers cheered, clapping each other on the back. Some even clapped the orc guards. Vera walked back toward me through the drifting smoke. Her white cloak was torn and blackened, her face streaked with soot and sweat. She stopped in front of me, looked at the chaos, then at the crowd that had gathered. In a voice loud enough for every ear on the pier, she declared, "This man saved me when I had no crown, no name, and nothing but hunger and chains. He gave me bread when the world gave me death. Today he helped save your harbor. Remember his name." I wanted to disappear behind the nearest stack of crates, but every eye on the dock was now on me, Garen Vale, the nobody from Pier 9. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like just another dock rat anymore. The smoke had finally begun to settle over Stone Harbor. Malgor Drax was dragged away in heavy chains, his white bone ring confiscated and sealed as evidence. The crates of hidden weapons lay open on the pier for everyone to see. By morning, the whole harbor would know the truth about Karzug, and the names of those who had profited from it would start to burn. Vera stood tall in the middle of it all, her torn white cloak flapping in the sea wind. She did not hide what she had been. Instead, she used it like a blade. "I was once a prisoner in those mines," she told the gathered crowd. "I survived because one man refused to let another prisoner starve. That is the strength my throne is built on." The dockworkers cheered her name. Some even cheered mine. By the next afternoon, they were already calling me new things. The Queen's friend, hero of Pier 9, the man who once fed a queen. The same harbor master who used to bark orders at me now offered me a chair and asked if I needed water. Sailors, who had never once looked me in the eye, clapped my shoulder and asked for stories. I hated every second of it. I was still the same man who had spent 15 years hauling crates and mending ropes. The attention felt heavier than any load I had ever carried. That night, I slipped away to the very end of Pier 9 where the lanterns were few and the waves spoke louder than people. I sat on a weathered piling, legs dangling over the dark water, the familiar loading hook still clipped to my belt. The salt air tasted the same as it had yesterday. Yet everything had changed. Soft footsteps approached. I didn't need to turn around to know it was her. Vera came alone, no guards, no cloak of office, just a simple dark tunic and the quiet grace I remembered from the mines. She stopped beside me and looked out at the sea. "You will keep loading ships here?" she asked. I shrugged. "Barrels don't betray you the way nobles do." A small smile touched her lips, but it faded quickly. She turned to face me fully. "I want you to come north with me, Garen." The words hung between us like a heavy crate waiting to be lifted. I stared at the water. North meant her court, her politics, her wars. North meant stepping out of the life I had hidden inside for years. "Because you feel you owe me?" I asked. She shook her head. "If it were debt, gold would settle it. I am not asking you to come as payment for old bread. I am asking because you still see people as they are, not as titles or threats. I need someone like that beside me when we rebuild the northern ports, when we tear down what remains of the slave routes that grew from Karzug. The work will be hard and dirty. It will not come with honors or fine clothes. But it will matter." I was quiet for a long time. The pier creaked beneath us. Waves slapped against the wooden posts. "I am not a man of palaces," I said finally. "Neither was I once." Her voice was soft. "In the mines, I was only Mara. And you looked at me like I was still a person worth saving." She stepped closer. The lantern light caught the thin scar near her temple. "In that prison you saw a hungry girl, not a tool or a threat. After I took the throne, almost no one looks at me that way anymore. They see only the crown. I need one person who still sees me. I felt something shift inside my chest, something I had kept buried under years of salt and routine. I remembered the cold nights when we had pressed shoulder to shoulder for warmth. I remembered the half piece of bread I had pushed into her hand. I remembered how she had looked at me then, not like a queen, not like a prisoner, but like two people trying to stay alive together. I did not want her to walk away again and disappear into a world I could never reach. I stood up slowly. My fingers found the loading hook at my belt, the one tool I had carried every single day for 6 years. I unclipped it and set it down on top of a nearby crate. The metal clinked softly against the wood. It was the only thing that had ever truly belonged to me on these docks. "Then I will go," I said. Vera looked at the hook, then at me. She understood what the small gesture meant. I had just left my old life behind. She held out her hand. I took it. Her grip was warm and strong, the same grip that had once helped me drag a dying prisoner out of a collapsed tunnel. A queen of the Orcs and a dock worker of Stone Harbor stood together at the edge of the pier, surrounded by the smell of smoke salt and the sea. The story had begun the moment she stepped off that royal ship and walked straight toward me through the crowd. The moment she had shouted across the entire harbor, "I know this man," everyone had thought it was a mistake. It wasn't. She had known me when no one called her queen. I had known her when she was only a starving prisoner with nothing but courage and a hidden name. Half a piece of dry bread all those years ago had not seemed like much, but to her it had been proof that someone still saw a person inside the chains. To me, the day she returned was proof that small kindnesses do not vanish. They simply travel a longer road than we expect, only to come back in the shape of a royal ship, a battle on the docks, and a hand reaching out to pull us into something bigger than we ever imagined. I had thought I would grow old as the nobody on Pier 9. Vera had remembered the man who once dared to be kind inside hell itself. And now we were leaving together.